Hi, I'm Greg Larkin. I am the founder and chief punk of Punks Pinstripes. I'm the author of the enterprise innovation best-selling book, This Might Get Me Fired. And today on the show, we are going to be talking about FOMO, fear of missing out, versus FULP, fear of losing power. We're going to be talking about how the greatest innovators fall in love with a problem, not a solution. And we are going to be talking about how obstructionism is the key to unlocking transformation for an executive leader, but it is also often their biggest blind spot.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, he's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. As we record this, it's the end of the second quarter of 2022. There is a war in Europe, in case you hadn't heard. Russia has invaded the Ukraine, and as much as we might be thinking about that, most people are actually distracted by expensive gasoline and overall inflation. Moreover, we've become distracted from the fact that the US in the last few years, in many ways, has seemed like it might be on the brink of some kind of a civil war. But what's behind what drives us into this great polarity? Well, I'm a great believer in that the large reflects the small and vice versa. What I mean by that is nothing is independent of anything else. For example, as much as we may want change, there is at least as often a stronger pull to keep things the same. We want things to be the same, but we want things to change. It doesn't matter which side of that you're on. Even in your organization, you may be talking about how you support innovation, while at the same time there can be a silent, or not so silent, civil war between those who want to hang on to social and business status quo and others who want change. The question is, does lasting change take place? Can it take place without some kind of a civil war? Well, stay tuned, because that is where we're going in the next two episodes. It's all about the civil war of change. As always, we need your help in staying relevant. So please get over to wherever you tune into us, and wherever you listen, do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, I know you're curious. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Chances are that you realize change can be difficult at any level. However, inside of a large organization, it can be doubly so, because for that change to not only take place, but to be effective, that often means the transition of power. And those in power usually are not in a hurry to give it up. So can we implement genuine, meaningful change without creating some kind of a cultural civil war? Well, you might be surprised. Let's find out, because our guest for the next two episodes is Greg Larkin. Greg Larkin is passionate about three things: transforming huge companies, being a good dad, and of course, punk music. He is a global authority on entrepreneurial transformation inside large organizations. He's been the transformational advisor for companies like Uber, Google, PwC, Booz Allen Hamilton, and other large organizations. He's also served as the Director of Product Innovation at Bloomberg, and across the Global 100, he's learned that change that's necessary is never easy, and often surprisingly Unauthorized. He's also the founder of Punks and Pinstripes, a global coalition of intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs and punks, which I was honored to present for last year, I believe. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the author of This Might Get Me Fired, which was a business bestseller in 6 countries, Mr. Greg Larkin. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, Dove. Thank you for that generous introduction.
You're welcome, mate. And thanks for being a fellow punk fan. Who is your favorite punk band, by the way? I've never asked you that, I don't think. Do you have a favorite?
I do. I have 2 favorites.
Yeah?
Bad Brains, probably my favorite. But Iggy and the Stooges. I mean,
really? Iggy and the
old
Stooges,
school
all right.
Iggy Pop.
Yeah? But not old British pop. Not old British punk.
No, there's one.
You went into the Pistols?
I like the Pistols. I can hang out with the Pistols. There were some better British punk bands, I thought. There was a band called X-Ray Specs.
Yeah, X-Ray Specs were great. I remember X-Ray Specs.
They were fantastic.
I loved X-Ray Specs.
And they were one of the first all-girl punk bands.
Yeah, X-Ray Specs were great. I like the bands that came out of punk, like The Jam. The Jam is one of my favorite bands of all time. I mean, the incredible level of talent that came out of that band. Sure. I mean, still to this day, having influence. Punk music is an interesting metaphor. That's why I brought it up, because it came out of a sort of a dead pop music world. You know, and it came out of an economy in Britain, because it was during Thatcher, you know, where people were feeling, in the working class were feeling very repressed. There was a need for change against the politics. There was a need for change against economics. There was the unions, the coal miners. All that was coming to surface at that time of punk music. And people were feeling like pop music was not really speaking for the people, much like politics wasn't speaking for the people. And that emerged into punk. And in many ways, that's kind of your philosophy, isn't it? It's like you're kind of the punk of, you know, not the spiky hair and the pierced nipples, although that pierced nipples is possible, we just don't know, but the spiky hair and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of your philosophy on change, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about that, and then we want to take you to what we're missing.
Yeah. One of the things that I experienced when I made the transition from startup entrepreneur to corporate entrepreneur was that everything that made me weird was a liability. Whereas in a startup environment, everything that made me weird was like, great, give that sun and water.
Right.
And after my startup Innovate was acquired and we kind of were like absorbed, and I was absorbed into the epicenter of Wall Street, there was just huge pressure. Like I realized in a very real way that everything that made me unique, different, motivated differently, my desire for impactfulness over status, that's a real risk. It wasn't encouraged. And it was a huge liability. And so I kind of slowly found myself, not consciously at the time, but being co-opted.
Yes.
And as that went on and as that became more pronounced, I really started to like dig into my old high school catalog of punk. It became the calling card. It became my safe place. Not so much because of the music, although I love it, but when I grew up in New York, the punk scene, everything that made me undateable in high school was valuable currency in the punk scene. And at a certain point, what I've come to kind of realize is that those misfits, those people who are kind of don't don't fit in inside of a large organization, that don't easily, there's not really a box that's been created for them. They struggle a lot, but if you actually like rewind when you see the ribbon cutting ceremony of a great transformation in a huge organization, or a great new product launch, and you kind of rewind all the way to the very beginning, what you will invariably find is the coming out party of one of those punks who said, you
Right.
know what, I'm not going to apologize for being different anymore. I'm here. If that means I need to change, then I'm not going to stay here.
Right.
And once they're able to kind of find their groove and find leadership that supports them, and find a way where they can let their engine out inside of that environment, that's always the beginning, first phase of any great breakthrough in a huge company, certainly that I've ever experienced.
It's a really good point, Greg. You and I talked a little about this before, but in previous conversations, I'm fascinated by this idea of diversity and companies putting a lot of money and time and energy into diversity, and yet cognitive diversity is highly scorned. Right? So you can be any color, stripe, sexual preference. You can come to work in any way you want to come to work, as long as you psychologically conform. So cognitive diversity is kind of frowned upon inside of the organization. And yet, and this is what I find really fascinating because of my psychology background, and yet we hail the heroes who are different. We hail the heroes who are the Elon Musks of the world, who don't think like other people. We hail the heroes who don't think like others when they become successful, but we punish the crap out of them until they do become successful. And I used to say, like, I'm from a small industrial town in northern England. That's where I was born. And, it was very much a tall poppy syndrome. You put your head up, you're going to get slapped. And the town I'm from is the same town that Albert Finney is from, the famous British actor, and many other of those kinds of people, Robert Powell, who played Jesus, and people like that. And I know those guys would have gotten shit when they lived there, just like I did. But once they're the hero, they're our hometown boys. And it's kind of like that with business, is like, you're an outcast. I know I was. You're an outcast until you're really successful, and then we'll claim you rather than support you getting there. And is that really what you're talking about inside of this being the punk, if we move it from a company to even a cultural nation?
Sort of. I think
Right.
there's this thing that I can synthesize. I mean, it has its own variation in by the person and by the company, but there's
Of
this
course.
thing that happens where, invariably, if you're someone who's motivated to be impactful and transformational and innovative, and you find yourself in a company which is really more afraid of change than they are of obsolescence,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you're going to have some really difficult 3 a.m. moments. That person will invariably wake up at 3 a.m. and think to themselves, why am I doing this to myself?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the best use of my talent and my ability? Well, what happens when they go into work the next day, when they have that 3 a.m. moment?
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, it becomes unmanageable. It becomes unsustainable. At a certain point, they get to this place where they say, I am who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't apologize for it. I'm capable of, I see things differently than this organization sees things. I see an unmet need in the market.
Mm-hmm.
I can get into a lot of trouble for making the change that I see is in demand. I'm doing it anyway, even if
Mm-hmm.
it gets me fired.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find a leader, and if the job of leadership inside of that enterprise is like, thank you for telling me, it's now my job to empower you to do the greatest, most entrepreneurial, most impactful, most transformative work of your life here, not anywhere else, here. When that connection happens, that's how the snowball starts rolling and accumulating mass and making it safe for all the other freaks to unfurl their freak flag and say like, wow, I didn't know I could be who I am here. But it always starts with like that one person finding that one leader who's like, thank you for revealing yourself. I had no idea. And I think what I'm getting at is like that can be very intentional. That can be part of what it means to be a leader. That can be part of the leadership playbook. And the more I've worked with people in the C-suite and institutions and organizations where that is kind of aren't known for that, or you would expect them to resist that, almost consistently I've never heard someone say, get the hell out of my office. What I consistently hear is, I need to be the leader, and I need to make it my job when I'm back at work to find those folks, to empower them to do what I got to do to not be an obstructionist, and to remove obstructionism for them.
So let's go to that, because in that context, I think you're right. I think that most people would think that if I show up with this, I'm going to get canned. And maybe they're not at the place of true courage yet. They want to, the listeners, and go, yeah, I want to go to my boss and do that, or I want to go to the leader and do that. But how do I look for the clues that my boss, my leader, will even embrace that, even embrace the idea, or worse still, maybe say yes but do nothing, which I know from some of the leaders I've worked with, that they've had, like, oh yeah, that would be great, oh, that's fantastic, and then nothing happens. Well, I'll bring it up with the board, or I'll bring it up with the team, but nothing happens. And now we're a year in, and this person is now gone from being innovative inside of an organization to being pissed off with the organization.
Yeah.
So how do they look for the person who might be the one who says, you know what, I want to encourage the punk, I want to encourage the creative, the nonconformist?
So it's very hard, first of all. And it's part art and it's part science.
Okay.
The part of it that is art is what I call punk sonar, right? It's a thing that happens over time when you are that person, is you become very good at transmitting the signal that you are that person, and not doing it in a way that is provocative without being combative. Meaning you're willing to have and say the difficult truth out loud. And you say it in a way that people may not like hearing it, but they appreciate the fact that someone had the audacity to say it. And so I think one of the attributes of punk sonar is, I'm going to say something that's hard for me to say and might be hard for you to hear, and I'm going to say it anyway. We cannot keep fooling ourselves that this business unit can carry on the way it is going, and that the leadership of this business unit can carry on the way it's going. Like, the objective data is that it is prematurely declining in its competitive landscape. Equally, the subjective data is that the most innovative talent on that team is leaving. So there's two data points that you can lock into right there. Right? Are the people who are staying and rising up the people who are the entrepreneurs who are capable of generating 20x return on investment? Or are they the lifers who are, I don't really think in those terms. I just think about retiring by the time I'm 60.
Right.
And you can really sense that. You can sense the kind of cultural momentum on a team or on a business.
Yeah.
But I think a huge attribute of Punk Sonar is the ability to say that out loud. And the other thing that I would say is that every organization has the fundamental tension of the modern enterprise is the conflict between FOMO and FOLP. FOMO, fear of missing out, the fear that modernity will bypass us.
Right.
FOLP is fear of losing power. And so every company is consumed by both of those feelings at exactly the same time all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the fundamental tension.
That's the Civil War we talked about at the beginning.
That's the Civil War.
Right.
Very few people in a position of leadership are aware that they are both of those things. On some days they wake up and they're terrified of FOMO, and others they wake up and they're terrified of FOLP, and that they take action based on what fear there is the nearest to their heart at any given moment without knowing what they're doing.
That's a really good point, because I think that we tend to think of it in the context of other, meaning, I have FOMO, but you have FOLP. I have FOLP, but you have FOMO, as opposed to thinking, and this is what's really important, what you just said, is that that's going on inside of you. The Civil War is an internal civil war, and the internal is not necessarily your organization. It might be yourself. It's the part of you that's going, yeah, but I really want to buy that next house, or yeah, I really want to make sure my kids are safe at college, and I'm dying inside because I've got to change, and this has got to change, but I can't give up. So I always say, you can't get to where you want to go while you're holding on to where you are. It's just not possible. But that's the dichotomy we go through.
It's something deeper than that, even. It's
good. Tell us more.
How the hell is Jane getting promoted ahead of me?
Right.
That's FOLP.
Right.
How is it that Michael is, through the grapevine, I hear that he's about to be, make more money than me this year. Even though that Jane and Michael may not, there's these weird ways of keeping score in an institution of that size where it's not just greed. It's not just I want the lake house. It's also like, I'm better than Michael and Jane.
Right.
And they exhibit behaviors which are very FOLP oriented all the time. So do I need to do that in order to get ahead? And so there's these constant contradictions between, on one hand, innovation and transformation is our number one strategic priority in this institution. It's what the board is worried about. It's what our investors are grilling us about on quarterly earnings calls. And if you actually keep score of the day-to-day experience of being a leader in this organization, that's not really what day-to-day experience is. FOLP is.
So transformation, innovation becomes, in that environment, a myth.
It can't. There's a real risk that it does. It's not a default myth.
No.
And I think, look, every company has its own wall of obstructionism.
Right.
And that obstructionism ranges from reasonable resistance all the way to totally unreasonable sabotage. So, and I think when you are able to name And the role of a transformation leader is not to remove obstructionism. It is to recognize the obstructionist defense and to call the right play in response to it. In the same way that there's no right single strategy for a sports team or a football team. You know, the job of someone who's an excellent coach and an excellent leader is they have a weakness in their defense, and we have to recognize the defense they're playing and exploit it. The job of a transformationist organization, and in companies that innovate better than anyone else, where I've seen transformation take root in unbelievable ways, they don't have an obstructionism-ectomy. There is no such thing. No. And they also do not subscribe into the like tech utopianism that we are a metaverse, organization from here on in. You know, they have this honest talk, which is when things are stuck, we cannot simply ask what are the numbers and what's the technology and what's the strategy and what are the processes. We also have to say, are we like blocked by our own, are we in our own way? Is obstructionism winning here? And the mechanisms of having that conversation and recognizing what are the bricks in the wall of obstructionism are, that can be taught, that can be learned, but it means that you're going to have conversations all the time as an executive leadership team. Every time you're reviewing the portfolio of businesses that constitute your company, that constitute your profitability and your earnings, it means that you're also going to have to ask, is one of the obstructionist prototypes winning?
Right.
Who is it?
Right.
How do we have a conversation where we move past it? And that's a very hard thing to do. That when you go to leadership school and you graduate from Harvard with a Harvard MBA, they're not teaching you to have that conversation. They're teaching you about discounted cash flows.
That's a very good point. All right, we are coming towards the end of this first part of the show. We're going to come back to the second part of the show in just one click. This is a fascinating conversation about really looking at what's in the way of innovation, and the courage to stand up to things that are blocking, even if you don't know they're blocking, and to know what is actually right to block them versus taking a look at it and going, yeah, we need to get this out of the way. This is a fascinating conversation, Greg. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Please tell people where they can find out more about you, and then we're going to come back for part 2 of this delicious conversation. Tell them where they can find out more about you, about your book, and about all the wonderful things that you offer.
Yeah, they can find me at punksandpinstripes.com. They can find me at thisisgreglarkin.com, and I am very active on LinkedIn. That is my social media platform of choice. So look for Greg Larkin, Chief Punk of Punks and Pinstripes on LinkedIn.
All right, we're going to be back in just one click. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the second part of this delicious conversation with Greg Larkin. Back in one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.